Okay, so let's get started. My name's Joss Colchester. I'm with the SI London Hub, and today we're hosting an event. We have Jeff Emmett joining us from Limerick in Ireland, and we have Shaun from Stockholm. This is a collaboration, our hub here in London, where I am, and Eve, who's part of our Geneva hub, who's going to be hosting this part of the discussion today. So we're talking about investing in the commons. It's part of a series where we're exploring the potential of decentralized technology for systems innovation, for transformational innovation. And previously, we kind of laid down some foundational ideas in terms of what the technology is and how it can create these kind of trustless systems, enable us to collaborate within large peer networks and so forth. And today we're kind of building upon that to really explore the potential of this for providing new frameworks and new models for developing commons infrastructure and investing in systems, should I say. And that's what we're talking about here. I might call it Commons 2.0, a new model for thinking about how we invest and revitalize the commons. I'm going to just briefly introduce Jeff and Shaun. So here we are. So Jeff Emmett, he's joining us from the Commons Stack. And Shaun is coming from the IXO Foundation. Both of these are really interesting projects, so I encourage you to take a look at both of them actually and what they're doing. Hopefully they'll, as we go along, kind of elaborate a bit on how they're building out their communities. The Commons Stack is a really interesting and burgeoning community at the moment. I've been keeping track of it over the past few months, and it looks great. What's happening, Jeff? Congratulations. And I know Shaun has been doing great things in terms of building their platform also. So how it's going to work is I'm going to talk to, we actually separated this out into two parts, really. I'm going to have it's more of two interviews kind of mashed up together. And I'm going to have a discussion with Jeff to get started. And then afterwards, Eve will be talking with Shaun about impacts, about investing and so forth. So the first half, we're going to talk with Jeff here, who's actually been with us before once or twice, talking about warm data and so on. So Jeff is a core member of I imagine a founding member of the Commons Stack and driving force behind it. So what is the Commons Stack? They're working to build commons-based microeconomies to sustain public goods through incentive alignment, continuous funding, and community governance, putting effective new tools in the hands of communities, enabling them to raise and allocate shared funds and make transparent decisions. So yeah, the Commons 2.0, this is where we're going to start. And actually, I'm going to frame this a little bit around some quotes and some kind of provocations to discuss with Jeff. But just as a starting point, let's say a few words about this idea of the commons. So the commons is what we share together. It's the common resources or space. It could be, physical things, water, the traditional concept of, the pasture where we put out our herds of cattle up in the mountains and we share that resource together. These days it could be an information commons, maybe Wikipedia. It could be a culture, that's a commons. Could be the trust within our community and so forth. These are things we share together. And because we share them, it requires that we actually work together in some way. We collaborate, right? These are things that affect all of us, and what we do in these commons and how we organize ourselves and so forth affects others. And we have to coordinate ourselves to get effective outcomes on everybody's part. So a lot of this is covered in the whole area of game theory. In every game of coordination, every commons, there's an equilibrium, a cooperative equilibrium and a non-cooperative equilibrium. And non-cooperative equilibriums really leads to the worst outcomes for everyone, unsustainable systems, and the tragedy of the commons, as we call it. And many people have identified that these tragedy of the commons is behind a lot of the kind of unsustainable systems that we have in our world, whether that's in food systems and whether fishing, for example, the collapse of coral reefs and fisheries around the world has been identified as a tragedy of the commons, where we haven't been able to coordinate effectively, and there's been non-cooperative behavior. So this has massive implications for many things going on in the world, I'd say. And Aristotle identified this over 2,000 years ago, the core kind of challenge here between the individual and the common interest. What is common to many is taken least care of, for all men have greater regard for what is their own than for what they possess in common with others. So it's a well understood kind of dynamic in game theory and a key challenge. And then, of course, we have institutions to try and help us overcome that, achieve those cooperative outcomes. Throughout history, we've had many different types of institutions, some small scale, some large, some centralized, some decentralized. Over the course of the modern era, as we built nation states and larger societies, we came to create more centralized institutions around the nation state and so forth. The smaller kind of decentralized ones got marginalized to some extent. And the idea is that potentially now we may have a technology, we may have the means to actually reintroduce large-scale decentralized institutions for achieving cooperative outcomes that may actually be able to achieve the same cooperative outcomes that today we achieve through centralized institutions that have many kind of have advantages, but they also have flaws and failings, particularly in an age of globalization. They've struggled to manage a lot of our commons. We see that for sure. And potentially with this new technology, it provides the infrastructure, a kind of trustless system, as we say, you know, the connectivity and so forth, for us to be able to build large-scale decentralized systems for aligning our activities and cooperating at a scale for managing these commons and incentivizing towards getting those cooperative outcomes. So that's who we are. And as I said, this is going to be framed through a number of interesting quotations. This is one from Primavera de Filippi. And she says, cooperation can lead to much better results if only it can be properly orchestrated. And this is exactly what the blockchain provides. Today, the blockchain is marking the beginning of a new digital revolution whose focus is not just human communications, but rather human interaction and human cooperation. What the internet has done to achieve global interpersonal communications, the blockchain could do today to achieve a global and systemic kind of collaboration. I think it's interesting she put that word systemic collaboration, right? It's not just a kind of piecemeal, you know, do something nice, do something good, and we should all get along. It's actually a systemic form of collaboration that this could potentially realize. And she goes on to talk about this a bit like we talk about organizations as complex systems, complex adaptive systems, and how this technology could actually enable those kind of decentralized systems. So blockchain is a new coordination technology that relies on a decentralized network of computers in order to coordinate individual activity in a completely distributed and decentralized manner. By analogy with nature, you can think of the blockchain as a way for people to mimic the social dynamics found in certain species of animals like ants and termites, as a way to promote and ideally achieve collective intelligence. By recording individual actions on a distributed database, the blockchain makes it possible for people to coordinate themselves indirectly and collaborate on a global scale without any centralized authority or hierarchical structure. So very interesting. I know Jeff and Shaun are both complexity thinkers. You'll hear them kind of refer to complex systems as we go along, but Primavera de Filippi is definitely making strong analogies to the stuff we talk about in complexity, you know, ants and termites and the way they manage to coordinate themselves without that centralized control. So I'm gonna leave it there just for the moment. I'd love to hear, I want to hear Jeff's thoughts on this. Of course, I'd love to just start with that question of the commons and how you and how Commons Stack think about the commons and that tragedy of the commons and all of kind of what I was talking about, how we might kind of overcome that with this decentralized tech.
Yeah, sure. You touched on a lot of really important points there. And I love that, you know, the Commons 2.0 that you started with, because I do think these technologies offer sort of new digital augmentation for new forms of commoning. And I think new forms of CPR or common pool resources in the Ostrom terminology. I'd like to back up a little bit and start with the definition of a commons, because I think there's some misinterpretation sometimes about what is a commons. It is what we share. It's the air, it's the fisheries. But David Bollier actually put it quite succinctly. He said the commons is a combination of three things. It's a shared resource. It's the community who uses that shared resource, and it's the rules or the protocols by which they use that resource. So without those three things, you don't actually have a commons. Just the fishery is not a commons. That's just the common pool resource. It's the community that uses or the communities that use the resource and the rules by which they use it. All three of those together form a commons. So it's people, it's resources, and it's processes. And I think that's kind of the minimum requirement for a commons, because otherwise you just have the resource, and the resource may get free ridden. And that brings me to the second point, that the tragedy of the commons is also a bit of a misnomer. This was Garrett Hardin in I think sometime in the 50s or 60s, was looking at sort of how common resources get misused. But actually he called it the tragedy of the commons. It's kind of the tragedy of the non-commons. Because if there aren't the right rules in place to protect the resource and the people who are using or misusing it, you get this potential free rider problem. And I don't know if I need to go into the detail on that, but essentially, if we don't have the appropriate protocols or practices for conserving our shared resources, then they are at risk of being depleted. Everyone has essentially the incentive to take a little bit more because the gain to you is greater than the cost to anyone else. The costs are kind of socialized, but the gain is for you. So this leads to the free rider problem, and what is often called the tragedy of the commons, but is probably more accurately the tragedy of the non-commons, because ultimately a commons would have rules or processes protecting against the free rider issue. So all that said, I think there's many of the problems we see in the world today are essentially free rider problem writ large. Climate change is just one, and I mean resource degradation around the world, biodiversity loss. All of these things are essentially caused by the free rider problem and by the lack of overarching coordination tools that we can sort of protect these large scale and often intangible. It's very hard to see how our individual impacts scale up to produce climate change or biodiversity loss or anything like that. So I think blockchains offer us a new and important substrate of monitoring, of measurement, of sort of understanding how our individual impacts sort of aggregate into collective problems or crises, as it were. And I think we can use these tools in interesting new ways to maybe it's worth pointing out Ostrom's rules for the commons. She set out these 8 really great rules. She spent her life studying on the ground commons. So, water aquifers in California, or a number of communities on the ground successfully sharing resources, allocating shared resources. And she came up with these sort of 8 principles, which I can't cite off the top of my head, but a number of them are, understanding, the state of the resources, being able to enact, say who is allowed to use them, who isn't allowed to use them, how much, of course, involving local governance. I know you mentioned a few times, commons at scale. I think it is important to scale these tools, but not necessarily in the monolithic scale like we see coming out of Silicon Valley. I think ultimately these commons need to be localized. We need to have subsidiarity, so the decision needs to happen sort of on the ground in the community where those resources are being used and allocated, as opposed to in a national government 6,000 kilometers away from, where the site of the commons is actually taking place. So I think we need federated scale. And I think ultimately these tools, where we're coming at it from the common stack, is we are trying to build convivial tools. So a toolkit that can be copied and pasted essentially, or forked in the blockchain terminology, where they can be useful in many different localized contexts, where you can take similar tools and deploy them in your localized setting. You can customize the parameters because every commons is different as well. We're not proposing that there's one set of tools for every commons in existence. They will likely vary widely, and I think we're still in the very early days of exploring how these tools can be used and how they can be parameterized to successfully help us manage shared resources and the commons.
Yeah, so some great points, and just that last one, it's more of kind of a scale, a fractal kind of scaling. I imagine you'd agree with that, and it's true, that's part of the problem, isn't it? The way our individual actions at the moment aggregate up they lead up to dysfunctional outcomes, don't they? And that's something that we need to kind of change locally, isn't it? That those ways that we're incentivized and the ways that we're interacting locally need to change to aggregate up to something different. I think a lot of the kind of sustainability crises are recognized to be those kind of negative externalities that come from the ways that we interact and the way that we behave. People don't like that word much, but how can we incentivize and change those local interactions so that we can get the emergence of a different outcome? And that kind of speaks to the whole incentives and tokens, the way that we can, the new ways that we can, instead of trying to manage things maybe up here, we're thinking more about how do we change the incentives and the ways that the information that people receive locally and they interact locally to get kind of positive externalities that aggregate up to the emergence of beneficial outcomes. Yeah, so let me just grab another quote here. This one's looking at more about peer production and decentralized production. It's kind of like, how can we actually work together? Because these are commons infrastructure, and we need to, there's certain production processes that need to take place if we're going to be able to regenerate them and maintain them and so forth. At present, we have, for a lot of these, we have governments that are in charge of managing them, and they do them in a centralized way. So here's an interesting quote from Brendan Bloomer from Block One EOS. He says, blockchains are enabling new community-driven business models capable of autonomously rewarding developers for code updates and users for value creation. We're beginning to see the future where technology platforms like Facebook, Uber, Airbnb, GitHub, insurance institutions, and even banking itself may exist with no centralized entity at all. We get into this idea of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, where the profit of such a network would be minimal to non-existent, and any excess value could be driven back to those that contribute to the prosperity of the network and those who purchase the token. An economic loop is closed and the value is driven back to the users as opposed to traditional shareholders. So yeah, getting to this idea of tokens as a way of incentivizing and managing commons, that's what he has to say. One other quick one from Julian from Protocol Labs. One of the interesting properties here is the ability to create markets where there weren't markets before. What blockchain application platforms can do is suddenly cut out this huge middleman with a protocol, and that's a matter into a market. That's an interesting feature, isn't it? It seems like tokens are turning everything into these kind of marketplaces. The moment you can take a very complicated process and translate it into a market where a whole bunch of different actors can vie for opportunities and just beat each other, you have this amazing optimization power where it will just fit the function much better than a centralized entity could. So yeah, there's a few things there, Jeff, but I guess it's the idea of how do we enable peer production, right? As a as something that can really provide these infrastructures, these commons, these commons have to be maintained, right? They have to be managed, parks and so forth. How can we really provide those in a decentralized way through markets, through incentives, through these tokens? Yeah.
Right. I think markets are a definite part of the solution. And I think markets have a bit of a bad name because currently we live in an economic monoculture. And the issue with markets in an economic monoculture is you boil everything down to the bottom line, the price. And this leaves out a lot of important information. We leave out social information, we leave out environmental information, we have all sorts of externalities, which sounds like, that's someone else's problem. And yet this problem is baked into, the market structure, and more so the monoculture, the economic monoculture market structure. And I think markets are amazing because they enable that emergent behavior. It's not a top-down control, it is a bottom-up participation sort of paradigm in markets. I think the issue with markets as we see them today is it all boils down to who can get the better price. And I think that leaves out our social issues, it leaves out our environmental, ecological issues, and we see that profit is maximized and everything else is kind of an externality. Our air is less important, our water quality is less important, and this is an awful situation to be in. So where blockchain, I think, offers an important augmentation is we can now have markets that operate on many different dimensions of value. We could have tokens representing carbon credits. We could have tokens representing clean air. We could have tokens representing a forest standing as opposed to a forest after it's been turned into lumber. And I think we have this sort of, we've tipped the playing field, where a forest in its natural habitat, or any of the ecosystem services that are provided by nature, which, by the way, run in the trillions of dollars per year, are basically unaccounted for in our current economic system. And what is accounted for is the raw products that come from destroying those resources. So a forest standing is worth nothing today, but a pile of lumber is worth whatever that can get on the market. So we have this kind of gradient that ensures that companies are going to turn standing forests into lumber because this is valuable and this is not, at least in our current economic calculus. So once we can break out of this economic monoculture and move towards economic permaculture, where we have multiple different tokens or multiple different dollars. I think money is hard to define anyway, but once we have tokens that can represent different things that we value, the value of the forest standing, the value that whales provide in ecosystem services to the ocean. Without whales, we wouldn't have plankton. Without plankton, we wouldn't have fish. Without fish, we wouldn't have, there's so many sort of feedback loops and ecosystem cycles here. And this actually comes to the point in the chat from Dora. She said, is commons a human-centered proposition? And if so, can it be modified to be a multi-species focused one? How can you take more than human needs into account for governance? And I think this is really important because this comes back to feedback cycles as well. And I do think that, the strict definition, I'm not too sure if commons would be a human-centered organizational form. But I do think that using tokens as additional feedback mechanisms, we can sort of bring these externalities back into the loop and allow humans to act more like the natural ecosystems that we come from. And all other forms of life follow these very close feedback cycles. And humans, we have this ability to kind of push the externalities outside of our current market structure. And I think that's what's causing most of the damage. So if we can use tokens to close those feedback loops and ensure that, market structures enable emergence, but they enable healthy emergence for the growth of our, social commons, environmental commons, ecological commons, et cetera, we'll be in a much better situation moving forward.
Yeah, and I guess tokens, funny little word, right? Just a little word, but it's so powerful, right? It's almost a mechanism that enables us to, as you do permaculture instead of monoculture when it comes to representing value, because that's kind of ultimately what's behind this, and the idea that these tokens may enable us to represent all these different types of value that are required to maintain commons infrastructure, right? The value in our relationships, how we trust each other, and the value in ecosystems, as you say, they may be able to help us move away, as you say, from that monodimensional conception of utility and dollars and so forth to a kind of multi-dimensional one, where we're starting to account for all these different types of value and then put them into tokens. And as you say, that can create a feedback loop for us to take the right actions, right? For us to be able to, we're going to move now into more accounting and so forth as we get towards talking to Shaun, but that's part of it, isn't it? I think it kind of starts with first is that recognition of how much we've degraded the commons and the unsustainability of the whole thing and the broader changes in society around values, and then accounting for that and being able to represent it with tokens, and then being able to build these systems, kind of like you're building, and block science and others, to be able to, and IXO, to be able to actually represent that, account for it, build it into the tokens and the incentives and so forth. So one other little quote on that subject, Vinay Gupta, this is getting to the idea of accounting and the ledgers and so forth, and this blockchain is kind of becoming a global computer in some way, and a way of kind of keeping track of what's going on, and accounting for it and exchanging it and so forth. So what he says, what the blockchain means to me when we say saving the world is that we stand up the necessary computer system to figure out exactly what our impact is on the world, and we close the feedback loop, so that we can see the consequences of our actions minute by minute, day by day. I think the blockchain finally brings us the tools we need to gradually build internet scale, which is to say global scale governance for the hard problems that have proven very resistant to government action so far. So I think, yeah, that's an important part of the equation, isn't it? The whole accounting for everything, and that goes beyond just the blockchain, doesn't it? Because you've got to have other technologies, you've got to have other means to account for these things, but it's kind of where we're going with this, isn't it? Do you want to speak to that at all? We'll move on to Shaun in a second.
Yeah, for sure. I do think the tokens offer us an interesting sort of bridge from currently, I guess where to come at this. I think tokens offer more granularity in democratic decision making as well. Our current representative democracies, we have some idea that one person, one vote is the best way that we can make decisions. I think this is actually it's if you think of it from a signal processing perspective, it's actually a pretty horrendous system. You can only give a 1 or a 0. What if I'm 25% or 50%? I think tokens will allow us to move into an information age democratic system where we can have intensity of preference. I can want something a little, I can want something a lot, I can want something not at all, or aside from just this 1 or 0, if you think of our democracies today are basically 2-bit democracies. Every 4 years you get a 1 or a 0, and then 4 years later you can do it again, 1 or 0. This is terrible signal processing. Like my Nintendo does far better signal processing than that, and I mean, we can now augment these decision-making processes using tokens, and I think that will give us much greater subsidiarity. It'll give localized decision-making. I think at the moment, nation states are our best attempt at sort of a commons on a national scale. There are redistributive efforts, there are public goods production. These are sort of the things that we can't provide for with traditional business models. And I think these tools offer us new ways to sort of rethink our business models. It's kind of a crude term for the commons. How can we support the commons? And one last point, since this is on investing in the commons, I think we're verging on a new form of digital common pool resource. And it's really interesting how we can create incentives towards investing in the things that are best for us all. And I'm curious how we can, create these tools that essentially allow a community to come together around a pool of money. And that money is crowdfunded. So you put your money on the table and you get tokens that represent that money. So you can now steer those collective funds with your tokens, or you can give your tokens back and reclaim your money if you completely disagree with what this group is doing. And this gives us some really interesting new space to play, because we can now allocate capital. We can crowdfund for the commons, and we can collectively steer those funds to produce the things that our community needs. And that may change on a community by community basis. But I think there's really new, interesting sort of like economic games we can play to fund the commons and create new business models for public goods. Because today, our current sort of corporate structures, I mean, they're very good at producing private goods and club goods, but common goods and public goods, it's not really a business model that we have worked out yet. So I'm really interested how these tokens can innovate in that area.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon an important point that many people kind of miss, that thing of all putting our resources into the commons there, and then getting the token back. And that token that we hold is tied to, in that investment, it's tied to the value of the commons. And as the commons increases, our value increases through that token. And that's how we're incentivized to look out for the commons and invest in the commons and so forth. Instead of a transactional kind of economy where you're getting value just by transacting, you're incentivized all the time just to transact with others and optimize what you're getting out of that transaction. In this model, the token is helping tie your personal incentives to that of the overall commons through that token and that investment and so forth. Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Jeff. That's interesting stuff for sure. We covered a lot there, a bit of a whirlwind tour. I'm going to pass it on to Yves to follow on.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Yves Canazzola. I'm a member on the representative of the Geneva Hub. So I think today Shaun will continue the initial discussion with many topics covered. He's a founder of the IXO protocol. So there is many questions. I have 7-8 questions, but I will probably go 2-3 minutes each if we can, because we know that I discussed with Shaun this morning, we talk a lot, so probably we'll stop at the first one, but we'll try to cover the full. But first, it's interesting to know, because I know that it's a decade-long project. And so he was initially a doctor in the health area, also advisor from the WHO. So I think my first question is to explain the IXO protocol in a few words, and how you move from the WHO to the cosmos universe, and how you make this path. I think it's maybe the first introduction on yourself, and then we'll go more in the IXO protocol if you don't mind. Your sound.
Sorry.
Okay.
All right. We'll try it without the headphones. Thanks very much for this introduction. So in 2008, I was in a unique sort of position. I was working at global policy level within the UK government in the international development department, and also running projects on the ground with Indigenous communities and around local socioeconomic development, mainly in the context of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and so it was health programs, but also looking at how to look at the other aspects of people's well-being in terms of socioeconomic well-being. And so having this perspective at a global level as well as a local level at the same time really helped to see this complex systems problem. And I guess really looking at it from the perspective of a supply chain of capital, so looking at from a capital allocator's perspective, how to get capital down to where it's needed on the ground, and then the supply chain of information from the ground to decision makers. And so with our centralized systems, we have centralized decision making and local action, and there's a disconnect. And so really, to me, this was a model that needed to be disrupted and decentralized with more local autonomy, more local decision making around resource allocation, as well as information flows coming back into the decision process. And so the ideas that formed around that time were very difficult to implement with the technologies available with Web 2.0. When I discovered blockchain technology around 2013, there was a kind of light bulb moment. It's everything that's been discussed today, but I think maybe just to bring it down to a sort of very simple principle that I think is key to how we invest in the commons, bringing information about the performance, about what's actually happening in the world, onto the same ledger as the financing is a game changer. So generally our information systems and our financing systems, particularly in the development sector, tend to be very, very separated. And they're both separated in terms of like the systems for information flows, but also temporality. So generally evaluations happen after projects have been financed, and you find out after the fact kind of what really happened. And so now we have the opportunity to kind of bring this together and create a close coupling between the financing and the information about what impacts that's having. And of course, with tokenization and with the blockchain mechanisms, we can then feed that into coordination mechanisms, incentive mechanisms, and so on. A sort of big idea coming from a medical background, and I guess this is the kind of community to say these crazy things, was that we were developing a digital immune system for humanity. So
this maybe
sorry, I've got a problem with my. Can you hear me? Yeah,
it's okay.
So using the analogy, the biomimetic analogy of human immune system, it enables us to locally sense and respond to threats, and the kinds of responses. Are you hearing me? Okay, sorry. Yeah, the kind of responses that are possible with Web3 technologies are better coordination. So you can start off with a sense and response at an individual agent level, but then if that requires more coordinated actions, so think of the immune system kind of signaling and drawing in other parts of the immune system, more of the kind of the heavy hitters, the cells and so on. You can create that organization, self-organization through DAOs, and then through the issuance of tokens. Tokens have a lot of the similar dynamics in an analogous kind of sense to antibodies, for instance. Potentiating, aggregating, catalyzing, and so on. And so I know this is an abstract idea, but I think when we start to imagine this in a complex systems context, I think it has the right kinds of dynamics for the local action that's needed in order to sense and respond more effectively and scale. So scaling from the bottom up, scaling in response to feedback loops, rather than top-down planning and control mechanisms.
Okay, great. So when we talk about this sustainable DeFi, in a sense, we are moving from Web 2 to Web 3, so the decentralized system. But when we want now to integrate this multi-stakeholder polycentric governance, how do you think we can onboard the local community, on how you will bring the education gap or the technology gap, because I think there will be this kind of DAO from a one stand of the world, and the implementation is also linked from a point of view of the local communities, that they understand how they will be involved in this polycentric governance on the trusted data system.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's still early days in terms of the like real use cases and real implementations of this, but really bringing decisioning into the choice architecture that people have. So the ability to spend your money, invest your money, save your money in ways that can have incentive feedback loops. So one of the things we're working on is community currencies that are tokenized. And if we get that right with the issuance mechanisms being linked to treasuries that can be that can grow with outcomes being achieved in the in the local context. So if through planting trees, for instance, that generates carbon credits, and the financial flows from the carbon credits come back into the community treasury, everyone in the community gets richer. And so that incentivizes collective action in ways that we've not been able to see before.
Yeah, great. So, now the bridge with the investment community, the impact investing, I think is a key of the solution, because it's integrated to the measurement, reporting, and validation process. So when they will come early stage, you are talking about the impact token, community currency, but maybe also there is some wording that is you told about the programmable capital and alpha bond. Maybe if you can go one step further in this debate, because I think it's an interesting game changer behind your protocol.
Yeah, so I guess adaptive financing is another way of talking about this, and really what we're wanting to do is link the financing to results. And we've already got examples of this kind of instrument within traditional finance when it comes to social impact bonds, green bonds, and so on. But generally, those are quite clunky, large instruments. The setup of those kinds of funding arrangements puts some adversaries in the mix. So you've got risk investors who are putting up their capital, expecting to get returns from some kind of outcome payment. And then you have implementers and verifiers. And so all of these agents in the system essentially are adversaries, because the impact investor wants to get paid, the outcome payer only wants to pay if the results are delivered, and so on. And so how do you coordinate these different players effectively and also do it in ways that are scalable? So currently, with the traditional ways of structuring these results-based financing mechanisms, it's really very intermediary heavy. So it requires lots of legal contracts, intermediaries who go and form the capital, get the investors together. There needs to be agreement upfront about what is the cost of capital and how do you incorporate the risks and have a risk premium that's going to cover really, I think, best guess estimates of what the real risks are going to be, because most of these development interventions are taking place within complex environments. And so I think generally, ex ante prediction of and pricing of risk is an art rather than a science. And so with risk adjusted bonding curves, we have a continuous funding mechanism using tokenized bonding curves. So the treasury gets formed on a continuous basis, and the pricing of participation is algorithmic. But the alpha mechanism feeds information in from the real world about the prediction of whether the outcome payment is going to be made. On a continuous basis, signals coming back in will reprice the bond. And as Hayek wrote, price is a great integrator of information, and also connects the incentives of investors who are in an on-chain environment with what's happening in the project implementation, in the real world. And so information coming on-chain adapts the finance by repricing the bond. Changes in price on the bond influence how people respond in the real world.
Great, thank you. Yeah, impact token could be connected to different protocol or different way. So there will be probably biodiversity, SDG, but the one, of course, that we can easily monetize as of today is a carbon credit, the carbon market. So in a sense, what you are building behind this protocol is a new standard. How do you see, and it's a collaborative, multi-stakeholder way to create a standard validated by trusted data on people, and of course now the market is because there is a regulation, but also existing standard. How do you see the adaptation of these two worlds? What could be a trigger, a game changer behind if it's a competition or cooperation, probably mixed. I hope not competition, but who knows?
Yeah, so what we've had of necessity within the carbon markets, just to get the markets going, is a unitization of this this accountable unit of value, which is a carbon ton. And so, like most complex systems, they often become simplified and maybe oversimplified in order to get adoption, and that's really what had to happen when the carbon standard was created. Towards 20, 30 years ago. With tokenization of carbon credits, we now are able to collect a lot more information and contain a lot more information in each unit, and there's differentiation. So not all carbon credits are the same. We have carbon credits that are claimed on the basis of emission reduction, so not emitting carbon, compared to carbon credits that are derived from carbon capture, and those are qualitatively different. And then you can go into all the co-benefits. So a carbon project that is doing carbon capture but is also creating jobs, increasing biodiversity, etc. Is qualitatively better than another carbon credit, and now it's becoming increasingly possible to do this differentiation and get better price differentiation across these different units of account. And I think that this is really important because it's helpful to have a unitary measure, but when you start to bring qualitative data and value to these units, it drives incentives and it makes market differentiation much more feasible, and that's really important for moving the game towards better outcomes more holistically. So we're not just focused on the carbon number, but rather the quality of what results are being achieved.
I have two more questions. One is, of course, connected to when we're talking about the wicked problem complexity. So the full value chain of impact, which is probably nonlinear and dynamic. And how do you think system thinking, system innovation could be integrated easily or not inside this kind of process? And because there is feedback loop, but how people, of course, there is probably some education gap between people understanding what does that mean. We are here to also part of a system innovation is to promote system thinking on other things. But how do you think this kind of approach could be integrated, and how easily it could be integrated?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a very big space to discuss. I think part of it is about having better information available and information feedback loops. So as I mentioned earlier, just bringing the accounting, even if that's a sort of fairly simplistic component of it, but bringing the accounting into the same system allows us to have information about value flows and also about the impacts that those value flows are having, and bring them into the same sort of information feedback loops. And so complex adaptive systems can't really evolve in a sort of conscious way unless we have those information feedback loops. Now with the blockchain, we not only have information feedback loops, but we also have incentive feedback loops. And so these two things together, if we get them right, I think are very powerful in terms of creating bottom-up ways of sensing and responding, as I said, but also directing human behavior towards outcomes that we want to see. Now, we can't do that with technology, without technologies that enable us to have state, so record in a reliable, sequential way the changes that are happening. And so, Web 2 doesn't really allow us that. And then we need to have programmability, so we can say, this is a future state that we would like to get to, and then we can coordinate our resources and our activities around that future state. And so focusing on outcomes rather than the inputs and the design of how do we get there, because I think a lot of the systems failures that we've seen have been through this kind of over-engineered approach and ideologies about how we design the solution, rather than focusing on the outcome and allowing for adaptation and an evolution towards the outcome. So with these systems, we now have ways of establishing clear outcome goals. And when we're talking about this in the context of impact, we can link those goals to the agreed global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, for instance. And so we have objective functions of the system, which is to achieve these goals, and we can set those in a programmatic way so that they incentivize collective action towards those goals. And that allows for this adaptation and this evolution to take place.
Okay, thank you. Probably the last one is now, of course, the bridge between traditional finance. It's one of the key issue for many issue, but one of course there is this kind of not moving from greenwashing to more impact accounting to better understand the bridge and having portfolios that is targeting toward a sustainable goal or other, probably carbon as a first, but maybe other dimension of the impact accounting. So of course, from this approach, this protocol and the decentralization, we can fulfill part of this interesting from outcome to impact to a positive impact that is durable and positive. Now, of course, the bridge is probably not on the understanding from outcome to impact is from token economy to traditional finance, and there is a regulation issue. There is also knowledge issue. Some people who are based in Switzerland, and we talk about blockchain. They are understand, but if you move a little further to the crypto economies, they are afraid to invest. So they understand, but the bridge is not yet there. So, but I think it's an important path from the traditional finance to the decentralized finance, and of course, how this protocol could be interoperable to the normal one, traditional one, not normal one. It's a mistake.
Yeah, so one of the projects we have is with a large Swiss bank, and they're not at that stage yet where they will invest in an impact bond using stable currencies, for instance, stable tokens. And so the bridge that we've created there is through linking claims about financial transfers using fiat banking transfers, which can be verified through open banking APIs. And then accounting tokens can be issued on the blockchain, and they can be used in these financing mechanisms to do the pricing and do the accounting. So I think that this this ideology of like having decentralized finance or traditional finance in the real world, in a complex world that we live in, it's not a black and white a kind of distinction, and there are great opportunities to link these systems together. And the work that we're doing with this large bank, is testament to that, and they're particularly interested in how to use verified data, and like in this project, we have financing of primary education where the children are using tablet devices, and as they interact on the devices, that's generating claims from the devices, which feeds into the pricing mechanism. So how can we blend these technologies together in ways that use the verifiability and all the other features of the blockchain technology and feed those into traditional financing mechanisms?
Yeah, great. So I don't know if Josh, you wanted to have a few words, or for maybe to summarize, or what?
Just we've got a little bit of time, so a couple of questions for Shaun, just about how things are progressing with the platform. You gave us one example there. It might be interesting to hear some more. Do you have other examples of projects that are being invested in? And what does it look like on both sides? Are there a lot of projects and not many people wanting to invest, or how's that? Are you finding interest on both sides? What does it look like in terms of what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, so just from a technology stack perspective, our analogy is, that our analogy is WordPress. So at the beginning of Web 2.0, the thing that enabled organizations to create their web presence and then do plugins that enabled e-commerce and so on, was this open source software that could run on Web 2.0. And so the technology stack that we've developed is open source and enables organizations to set up their marketplaces using Web3, and we call it the Internet of Impact, which has these features of statefulness and programmability and verifiability. And so examples of those kinds of marketplaces that are busy being set up are in Hong Kong, a data consortium for the social sector, which is funded by the Hong Kong government. So that's bringing around 500 organizations, including local time bank cooperatives, into this platform to enable them to make claims and get new forms of financing, and implement community currencies within the time bank context. In Africa, we're working with UNICEF on a youth marketplace for the green economy. So connecting youth to earning and learning opportunities, and they can build up their digital CV using decentralized identifiers and self-sovereign identity, verifiable credentials. That has massive potential to scale, given the huge youth population, particularly in Africa. We have in Brazil working with a platform with regenerative agroforestry, small scale farmers. So really the use cases are quite diverse geographically and also across impact sectors. And with the capabilities, the tooling that this provides, it really enables organizations to set up new types of marketplaces. And I think in terms of the theme of today's discussion, this is really about decentralized cooperative marketplaces that connect the investors or funders with the implementers, with the verification services and the beneficiaries or the participants in the marketplace, who are receiving and producing the goods and services related to the impact economy.
Great, thanks a lot for sharing that, Shaun, and yourself, Jeff. We'll wrap up now. Really interesting and I think super important conversation. I think I saw on the news last night that 1 in 10 people in the UK now hold cryptocurrencies. So this is really at a tipping point, right? Isn't it? Like I've been involved in this now for about 5 years. Some people more. Like I think Shaun, you go further back. And with NFTs, that's coming top of mind for a lot of people. So we're really getting close to a tipping point. And the point I always emphasize to people is that technology is technology, right? And we can use it in many different ways. People often come in and they try to be deterministic about this, don't they? Say, oh, blockchain is going to save the world and so forth. And it's always about, it enables new things, the kind of things you're talking about that we couldn't really do before. But it's about how we use that technology and the values that we embed it. And that's so clear with tokens. Like it's so clear that we're embedding values into this technology and the systems we build. And it's really critical that we have these conversations and we kind of try and guide it in a way that's really productive, because I was there for the second generation internet. I'm sure many of us were here. We had that optimism about peer production and Wikimedia, and so forth, the possibilities for us to co-create systems. And then the platforms came along and a lot of it got captured, right? And we know that can definitely happen here again. This technology is not resistant. No technology is resistant to being used in, it can be used in many different ways. So I think it's a critical time when we have these conversations, when we look at projects like Shaun's and Jeff's, because I think they're really shaping this in a positive way. So great to have you both here, and thanks for this discussion. We'll wrap up now, and hope to see you all again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Guys.